In this video, we're going to be ranking every defensive lineman in the 2024 draft class that I've watched. I've got 29 defensive linemen graded at this point, and the key buzzword for this video is going to be the word flash. If you see on one of my scouting reports that somebody's flashed a club swim, that means they've used it successfully like 3 times on tape, and that's really just the way it is when it comes to scouting defensive linemen. Most of these players coming out of college don't have high-level pass rushing production. A lot of their responsibilities on their college defense is to play the run first and foremost. So there's a lot of players drafted in the top 3 or 4 rounds every year where the majority of their projection is based off of athletic traits and a few high-end flashes on tape. But we'll start off the list with Georgia defensive lineman Zion Logue. He looks like a starting defensive tackle on tape, 6'5.5", 314 pounds, long arms. His size allows him to hold up okay at the point of attack, but he gets sealed off pretty easily and isn't very disruptive in the run game, and then he has really no pass rushing skill set to speak of. Another UDFA grade is going to be Jawan Briggs out of Cincinnati, 6'1.5", 313 pounds with extremely short arms, under 32 inches, and he was a decent college player, plays with a ton of effort. The majority of his impact plays were hustle plays, but I'm not exactly sure that he has a role in the NFL. He doesn't have the length or athletic traits or hand usage to contribute much as a pass rusher, and he has a decent anchor, but his lack of length really inhibits his ability to control blocks, and I don't really think he has the raw play strength to be a nose tackle. He played the majority of his snaps last year at 5 technique, actually. I've got a priority free agent grade on Nathan Pickering out of Mississippi State. On paper, he has good size for an interior player, but on tape, you can tell he has a really thin lower half, kind of a disproportionate build, and that gives him some issues when it comes to anchoring against double teams. He was a productive run defender in his final year, although the majority of his production came off of stunts and gap exchanges. He actually has some decent lateral fluidity to bounce into gaps and slide away from blocks, but it's not really projectable to the NFL. When it comes to just one-on-one point of attack, stack and shed a block, I thought he was pretty average, and he doesn't really give you much as a pass rusher, and I don't think he has the athletic upside to develop much in that area. And then my final priority free agent grade is Justin Rogers out of Auburn. He is a run-stuffing nose tackle. He's not going to give you anything more than that. 6'2", 330 pounds, some of the worst athletic testing in this class. He can hold up in the A-gap, eat space. He's got some quick hand usage to disengage from blocks, but there is no pass rushing upside, and it's not even like he was lights out against the run. I thought his anchor for a 330-pound player was average to above average, and he doesn't have the range or speed to uncover from reach blocks. If you just run wide zone or anything to the outside, he's not going to be a factor. I've got a 7th round grade on Illinois defensive tackle Keith Randolph Jr. He's kind of a high cut defensive lineman, struggles to really create leverage and generate much power with his bull rush or anchor against the run. He has some quickness to shoot into gaps. He has a really effective swim move, but he's going to be one of several players that we talk about that isn't really athletic enough to offer a whole lot as a 3 technique, and he's definitely not big or strong enough to play at nose tackle. And then Miles Murphy out of UNC comes in as my 24th ranked defensive lineman. He has really good size but limited athletic traits. He's able to hold his ground in the run game. He's got quick hand usage to club swim past down blocks, and he plays with good effort. He'll get some hustle pressures, but he doesn't really have the athletic juice to pressure the quarterback consistently. My 23rd ranked defensive lineman is Jordan Jefferson out of LSU, and he's kind of a project nose tackle. He has good size and actually a really explosive first step. He can shoot gaps when he sees an opening, and he's got the lateral quickness to outpace reach blocks. He's able to just outrun backside cutoffs against wide zone, and then he has good play strength and really heavy hands. When he's centered to a block, he can stack and shed, control the block. When his footwork is in sync, he actually has a solid anchor, but his technique with his hands and his feet really limits his effectiveness. There are times he has a heavy-handed, powerful initial punch, but for the most part, he's disjointed and sloppy into initial contact. He isn't really landing his hands inside and controlling the interaction. He's letting blockers get into his frame, so he gives blockers early control way too often, and there's a lot of times that he'll just get rotated and pointed towards his back end zone. And then his footwork really limits his ability to set a strong anchor. Just like I said with his hands, there are times that his footwork's right and he's able to plant plant that back foot and set a strong anchor, but he's usually playing with an uneven base and he gets displaced off the line of scrimmage pretty frequently. And then as a pass rusher, he's got the first step to potentially develop in that area, but he doesn't have any go-to moves at this point. His hand usage is uncoordinated. Unless he just completely revolutionized his skill set, I don't see him offering much on third down. And then my final 7th round grade is Jaden Crumedy out of Mississippi State. He has decent size and athleticism. I think really strong hands at the point of attack. When he fires his hands inside, he's able to lift the blocker's pad level, generate knockback, and reset the line of scrimmage. He's more of someone that's going to stalemate blocks and kind of cloud up gaps on the interior than like a quick stack and shed defensive tackle. He struggles to disengage quickly, especially on the backside if he's two gapping, and there's a lot of times running backs are able to run right through his gap and he just can't disengage and make that arm tackle. I don't really think he has the play strength to be a nose tackle. He struggled a lot with double teams and combo blocks, and he had some flashes as a pass rusher. He has a really nice club swim. There were a couple times that he was able to use stutter steps early in the rep to kind of freeze the blocker and then quickly transition into that club swim, but he has a pretty one-dimensional pass rushing approach, doesn't really have a power element as a pass rusher, and if he doesn't get a clean win, he struggles to clear himself from contact and continue to work into the pocket. So I think he's a solid player. There just isn't one trait or skill that really sets him apart. My 21st ranked defensive lineman is Logan Lee out of Iowa. He's an undersized 3 technique type of player, but I honestly think he might be too small even to play 3 technique. This might be someone you line up as more of a base defensive end, 5 technique. He's 6'5", 281 pounds, just over 32-inch arms, but he had some really impressive athletic testing, 95th percentile short shuttle, 92nd percentile 3-cone. He has the athletic traits to shoot gaps and make plays in the backfield. As a pass rusher, he has the lateral quickness to be square up with a blocker and threaten either gap. He's got a speed chop that's his primary rush move, but he also does a really good job of transitioning to a secondary rush effort if he isn't firing off the snap early. So if it's play action and he's stalemated with the block, he can quickly transition into his pass rush and get upfield. He struggles with the same thing that a lot of short-arm pass rushers struggle with, which is if the blocker gets their hands inside, he doesn't have a lot of recourse to continue his pass rush. If they latch him with inside hands, his pass rush is pretty much neutralized. And then being tall, lean, and having short arms is pretty much the worst combination when you're projecting a power rusher. He can't really generate leverage or initial knockback with his bull rush. So overall, he's got some interesting traits as a pass rusher, but what's really going to hold him back is his run defense. Now at Iowa, he was actually a decent run defender. He's very technically sound against the run. He's just routine punching and separating from down blocks. He does a great job of reading the play, and then when he gets into the backfield, he's got the pursuit speed and body control to finish tackles. He just gets moved back in the run game so often. He gets swallowed by double teams, really puts up no resistance, and even against single blocks, if he isn't perfect with his hand technique, he just doesn't have the sand to hold his ground. And then Gabe Hall out of Baylor is a really interesting player, purely an athletic project. He's 6'6", 291 pounds, 34.5-inch arms, really explosive. He was actually one of the best performers at the Senior Bowl. His swim arm over move was pretty much unblockable, and he was probably the player coming out of Mobile that I was most excited to watch on tape. I hadn't watched him heading into that week, but his tape was very disappointing, and you can tell why a player with those athletic traits wasn't really getting any hype. He had 21 pressures and 2 sacks last season. You just rarely see him unlock those athletic traits as a pass rusher. He's pretty indecisive with his hands, doesn't really have any workable counters, and then another player that's tall and thin, so he really struggles to get much push with his bull rush. So based on the Senior Bowl, you can tell that he has at least one move that he feels pretty comfortable with, but even if that swim move turns out to be effective in the NFL, he's still got to diversify his pass rushing plan, and then he also has to add weight and fill out his frame to really hold up in the run game and generate power as a pass rusher. He is a high effort player, consistently runs to the football. I think he's definitely worth a flyer on day 3. I just wouldn't take him any earlier than that, expecting immediate production or anything. My 19th ranked defensive lineman is Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. He projects, I think, as a nose tackle with some pass rushing upside. He's 6'2.5", 325 pounds, so sturdy build, low center of gravity, but he's got sub 32-inch arms, which gives him a lot of issues keeping blockers millimeters off of his frame. And there's a lot to like with Christian Boyd's tape. I think the hand pop is the first thing that stands out. He just blasts into contact. When he's centered with his initial strike, he can disrupt the blocker's balance and reset the line of scrimmage. And you see those 38 reps in the bench press actually show up on tape. He's able to rapidly disengage from blocks when the running back picks a gap. But for a nose tackle that's playing in the FCS, he was getting moved off the line of scrimmage way too often. If he doesn't establish early control, he can get steered out of gaps and displaced in the run game. And then you see with his testing, he's just not a great athlete. I think that really shows up against wide zone. He has a hard time flowing laterally and keeping pace with reach steps. As a pass rusher, he's actually really technically proficient with his hands. He's got a lot of different moves. I saw a club swim, rip move, forklift. He does a great job of transitioning quickly into counters when his first move is neutralized. The one thing that's lacking from his pass rushing profile is I didn't think he had a very effective bull rush. And when you're playing against FCS competition, really with everything, I'm just going to be a lot more skeptical. He was great at the Shrine Bowl, probably one of the best pass rushers there, but I still think his tape combined with his level of competition should have him as a mid day 3 grade. Next up, we've got Marcus Harris out of Auburn, who is a really good college player. I just think has some limitations when we project him to the NFL. He was an excellent run defender last season, led the SEC with 23 run stops. He plays with such low pad level, really hard to latch onto. He pretty much forces blockers into waist bending to secure any sort of contact. In the run game, he is so quick and precise with his hands. He's got automatic stack and shed, very quick reaction to an unbalanced block attempt. He can swim over or swipe through a block. And then he's not an elite athlete, but in short areas, he's really explosive and controlled. His pursuit skills in the backfield are as good as some of the linebackers that we talked about in the last episode. He can throttle down, redirect his angle. He's got the explosiveness to just burst a couple gaps over and make a shoestring tackle. If we were just ranking college run defenders, he would be a lot higher on this list, but he's 6'2", 286, 32-inch arms. He just doesn't have the size to hold the point versus double teams. You'll see a lot of times he'll be engaged with a single down block and then another combo will gallop into him and they'll just widen him out 3 yards over. I think in the NFL, he's someone that could make some plays in the backfield, but as far as just down-to-down run defense consistency, I'm not really expecting a whole lot from Marcus Harris. And then he doesn't have the elite athletic traits that you want for a player of his size. He's an okay athlete, but not someone that's going to threaten NFL offensive linemen as a pass rusher. At Auburn, he had a really effective bull rush. His natural leverage gave him a huge advantage there. And then like we were talking about with Logan Lee, he's really good at sudden gear shifts late in the play to access that pass rushing juice, but he doesn't really have the sophisticated hand usage or the length to really project much development there. He's not somebody that won very frequently as a face-up rusher, and at the Senior Bowl, I think that was really highlighted. He was one of the least effective pass rushers in the one-on-ones. So out of any defensive lineman in this class, Marcus Harris has the highest discrepancy between how good their college tape was and how high my grade for them projecting to the NFL is. My 17th ranked defensive lineman is Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic. He's 6'1", 320 pounds, built like a minion that ate another minion. He just plants his roots in the A-gap and is not fazed by double teams. But what I think sets him apart from a lot of the space-eating nose tackles that we see in the later rounds every year is that he's actually really quick and talented with his hands, and he's got some explosiveness to project as a playmaker, penetrator in the backfield. He doesn't have elite explosiveness off the ball or anything, but he can fire out of his stance and win some early leverage. He's quick and energetic with his hands in both phases. In the run game, he can swipe away a blocker's punch. If somebody's leaning into a down block, he's so quick to get into that swim move and shoot into the backfield. He can do all of the boring nose tackle dirty work stuff at a high level, but also make some splash plays in the backfield. As a pass rusher, I still don't think he's going to be someone that you have on the field on early downs, but his hand usage is pretty advanced for a nose tackle. He's got a double swipe, a club swim, a speed chop. He can disarm the blocker's hands early in the rep, and again, he's got the first step explosiveness to win the edge. Being so low to the ground and having his play strength and again, decent explosiveness, he was actually able to generate some push as a bull rusher, but he doesn't really have the chase down speed to convert pressures to sacks at a high rate. He's more someone that's going to flush people out of the pocket than convert a lot of those opportunities. He also has very poor lateral quickness, so he has to win with that first move. He isn't shifty enough to counter back across the blocker's face and attack that other gap. He has a spin counter that he uses when his first move gets neutralized, but it's just so slow developing and easy to mirror. So he's not a player that's going to be like the central focus of your pass rush, but if you've got him in there on early downs and they run like a play action shot play, he can swipe down the blocker's hands, get some pressure on the quarterback, force him to get rid of the ball early or make an inaccurate throw. It doesn't really seem like anyone else is that high on Evan Anderson, but I'm a fan of his tape. He might go undrafted, but I like him as a day 3 nose tackle. Next up, we've got Tyler Davis out of Clemson, 6'2", 301 pounds, very short arms, just over 31 inches. He was one of the best run defenders in college football last year. I see him as a high floor, early down run defender that doesn't have much upside to give you a whole lot as a pass rusher. In run defense, it's hard to poke too many holes in his game. He can knife through combos and shoot gaps. He doesn't really have high-end athletic traits, but his best drill was the 10-yard split, which I think is indicative of what shows up on tape. He has the first step quickness to beat blockers to their landmarks. He's got some decent chase down speed. I just think he's a player where if you're in the late 5th to early 6th round and everyone else on the board is a pure projection, you need just a single or a double that's going to upgrade your run defense. I think Tyler Davis is a great option. Now, what we said to start the video about defensive linemen and how few opportunities they're given at the college level, that goes double for Clemson defensive linemen. There's just so few plays where they're actually asked to pin their ears back and pressure the quarterback. But when he was given the chance, I thought he showed a quick first step. He's able to generate early power in his bull rush. There were a couple times he was able to win with an arm over move, but for the most part, it's a pretty unrefined pass rushing move set, and again, doesn't have the high-end traits to project too much development in that area. My 15th ranked defensive tackle is McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M, and he's such a weird evaluation. He has the prototypical build for a nose tackle. He's short, 326 pounds with long arms. He's got the low center of gravity. He's got the length to separate from blocks, and you would think he has the size and play strength to hold up in the run game. He was a highly rated recruit, and he came into the year with a lot of top 100 and even top 50 hype, but he was pretty much the opposite player on tape than I was expecting. He's basically a 3 technique in a nose tackle's body. He ends up on the ground as often as you'll ever see for a 330-pound nose tackle. His play strength at the point of attack was very disappointing, and he doesn't have great footwork when it comes to taking on combo blocks. He plays with a narrow base, which negatively impacts his balance, and way too much forward lean, so blockers are able to snatch trap him and put him on his face. If you're drafting McKinley Jackson to be a nose tackle that can just hold the point and control the A gap, maybe he can develop into that, but that's not what he was at the college level. But in the run game, he has extremely quick hands. He can suddenly and violently deconstruct blocks. Another one of these defensive tackles that does a great job of exploiting overextension. If somebody's leaning into a down block, he just tosses them downfield. So he has the skill set of like a penetrating 3 technique, but he has the size and athletic traits of a space-eating nose tackle. He wasn't a productive pass rusher, 14 pressures and 4 sacks this past season, but he did flash some pass rushing juice that I think could be tapped into to an extent. He has a swipe move where he just crushes the outside hand and wins the edge immediately. He also showed the ability to counter with a spin move and get to the quarterback, but he had a 23-inch vertical, which is 0.6th percentile. I think when he was trying to win with his hands, he had some decent lateral explosiveness to cross the blocker's face, but you really see that lack of acceleration when he tries to win with power. He just doesn't generate any early push or sustain his leg drive at all. So McKinley Jackson kind of signals the start of these defensive linemen that have some enticing traits, but haven't come anywhere close to putting it all together. If he can improve his footwork, I think he can be a really good run defending nose tackle with some gap shooting upside, but at this point, he's just a big body that's unreliable against the run. Now, I said we were moving into the high upside tier, but that doesn't really apply to my 14th ranked defensive lineman, which is Justin Aboigbe out of Alabama. It seems like we get this player every year under Nick Saban, whether it's Justin Aboigbe, Byron Young, Deshaun Hand. The high floor run defending Alabama 5 tech that doesn't give you anything as a pass rusher, but is just a really solid run defender. And with Aboigbe, the tape in the run game really speaks for itself. Outside of holding up against double teams when he's forced to play on the inside, he pretty much does everything in the run game at a high level. He's early and accurate striking with his hands inside. He's got the length and power to stack and shed consistently. He's extremely quick processing the blocking scheme, absolutely refuses to be cut off on the backside of zone runs, and his one elite skill or trait is his contact balance. He just completely dissolves pullers and slice blocks, any kind of move block. He's able to surge into contact and compress the gap. They didn't really use him much as a pass rusher. I thought he took advantage of his opportunities. He's got a pretty nice club move as an inside counter and a solid bull rush, but his hand usage for the most part is pretty underdeveloped, and he doesn't really have enticing athletic traits. So to me, Aboigbe is a scheme-specific, high-floor, low-ceiling run defender. My 13th ranked defensive tackle is going to be T'Vondre Sweat out of Texas, and I did move him down significantly after his DWI last week. Evaluating him purely as a football player, if he had no off-the-field issues, he would have a late third-round grade, and he'd be my 8th ranked defensive tackle. The DWI, combined with his history of not being fully engaged with football and kind of partying off the field, that does significantly lower my grade for him. Not only is it dangerous and irresponsible, but he kind of fails the common sense litmus test. If you can't avoid getting in trouble like that a month before you're going to get drafted when you should be on your best behavior, I don't know why an organization would think they could trust investing a high draft pick in you. But just looking at him as a football player, I do think T'Vondre Sweat was a little bit overrated even before all the off the field stuff. So he's 6'4.5", 366 pounds at the combine, but he didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl, and his playing weight down the stretch in 2023 was pushing 390 pounds. So 366 is a weight that he dropped down to. He only played 503 snaps last season, which was his career high. Now, in fairness, Texas rotates their defensive line a lot. Byron Murphy only played 438 last year, so I don't think the snap count is that indicative of his ability to carry a full workload in the NFL, but I feel like common sense is, like, there's just no way that he's going to have the stamina to be a 3-down player at 370, 380 pounds, whatever he is. So I think he's an early down nose tackle that can actually bring something to the table as a pass rusher. He's pretty much immovable in the run game. He just eats double teams. I don't think he's that technically sound anchoring against combo blocks. It's really just the fact that they can't move him. There were a couple times on tape that he got put on his back, and you don't see him that often planting the post foot and really using proper technique to set his anchor, but I still think he projects as someone that can just occupy blocks and clear space for linebackers. Against single blocks, there were some times that he would kind of just rely on his size and not really take command of the interaction, but when he's fully engaged with his hands, like, he's got textbook lock peek shed technique. He can just take complete control of one-on-one blocks. So I think he has the floor of being a solid early down run defender with potentially some special upside. He is still a very limited athlete, and we'll get into that more when we talk about his pass rushing, but he ran a 5.27, 26-inch vertical jump, 98 inches in the broad. The consensus reaction to his combine testing was like, yeah, the numbers aren't great, but they're really impressive for a 366-pound player. And if we're just viewing the combine through the lens of, like, impressive human accomplishments, then yeah, T'Vondre Sweat is an impressive athlete for his size. But translating it to what actually happens on a football field, when the offense is running outside zone away from T'Vondre Sweat, the running back isn't thinking, yeah, this guy can't chase after me, but he is a really good athlete for his size, so I guess I'll slow down and give him a chance. They're just going to run away from him, and no matter how good his weight adjusted speed is, he just has some real limitations as far as tackling range. So that's the one limitation with T'Vondre Sweat as a run defender, but overall I think he has a high floor and a high ceiling in that phase. But as a pass rusher, I think it's a much more complex discussion. I said that I don't think he'll have the stamina to be a 3-down player, but I'm not even sold that he has the ability to where you would want him to be a 3-down player. He has some of the best pass rushing hand usage that you'll see for a nose nose tackle. He has a dominant club swim. If the blocker uses a two-hand punch, he's got that two-hand slap down to disarm them. For a massive space-eating nose tackle type, he is so quick and decisive with his hands, and that's why he performed pretty well in a lot of the advanced pass rushing metrics. He had an 85.3 PFF pass rushing grade, which ranked 9th in college football, 15.3 pass rush win rate, ranked 10th. Those metrics that are just based on defeating the blocker in front of you, and in the case of PFF grades, defeating them as quickly as possible. T'Vondre Sweat performed really well in those metrics. But what I think limits his upside as a pass rusher is what he does after he defeats the block. There's a lot of plays on tape where he might slap down the blocker's hands, put them on the ground, and then he's got a wide open runway to the quarterback 5 yards away, and he just doesn't have the closing burst to convert those early wins into sacks or a lot of times even pressures. Even at the Big 12 level, he had a hard time closing in on the quarterback, and that's only going to get more difficult in the NFL where the quarterbacks are way more athletic. And then the other thing is that he's purely a finesse rusher, at least on tape. At the Senior Bowl, he had that dominant bull rush against Bo Limmer where he just folded him in half, but you'd be hard pressed to find anything like that on tape, and even just pushing the pocket, creating some displacement is pretty rare for T'Vondre Sweat. He just doesn't have the explosive first step to really create much initial knockback, and anytime he tries to use a power rush, it ends up going nowhere. So I think on early downs, he can get some pass rushing wins, and he could be a run defending nose tackle that's not going to be a complete zero as a pass rusher, but I just think the athletic limitations are going to keep him off the field on third downs. I think it would be pretty hard for him to be one of a team's 4 best pass rushers. My 12th ranked defensive tackle is Leonard Taylor out of Miami, and he's just the classic college defensive tackle prospect. He's got some exciting athletic traits, some high-end flashes, overall very inconsistent tape, and he wasn't used anywhere close to the way he should have been in college, or definitely the way he will be used in the NFL. He's a former 5-star recruit, showed some really exciting flashes in 2022, and seemed primed to be a top 10 to 15 pick this year. You watch him in 2022 and he looks like he could be one of those elite penetrating 3 techniques, but his tape this past season was extremely disappointing. I think he probably had the second biggest fall off in this class to Kalen King out of Penn State, and part of that's his fault, but part of that's on Miami for playing him completely out of position. In 2022, he played about 84% of his snaps at 3 technique, which is what he's going to be playing in the NFL, but last year he was pretty much their full-time nose tackle. He only played 36% of his snaps at 3 tech. Almost all of his other snaps were lined up over the A gap where he's having to take on double teams. He's not getting those favorable one-on-one matchups against guards, so a lot of his tape is just not really useful to evaluate. When he's lined up at nose tackle, he just gets run over by double teams. Like, it is clear he's not a nose tackle in the NFL. He's not even a good nose tackle at the college level, but you get halfway through one game and you can tell that. I still think his play strength and footwork against single blocks leaves a lot to be desired, but it's nowhere near as disastrous as his tape against double teams. He has an explosive first step, so he can shoot gaps and make plays in the backfield. He has long arms to establish first contact, and there's plenty of reps on tape of him stacking and shedding and lifting the blocker's pad level. I think there is something to work with as a run defending 3 tech. The other thing though is that he misses a lot of tackles, but as a pass rusher, which is really where we're projecting the most value for Leonard Taylor, again, the tape is so difficult to evaluate. Rushing the quarterback as a nose tackle is so much more difficult because most of the time you're going to be facing a double team. He wasn't very effective against doubles. He's not a great power rusher, not someone that's going to push the pocket with any sort of consistency, but he just rarely had the opportunity to have a two-way go against a guard and really tee off. But this stat that Brett Coleman tweeted is pretty telling. Leonard Taylor's pass rush win rate as a 3 technique last year was 28.6%, which is a small sample size, but that would rank first in college football by a healthy margin. So if you draft Leonard Taylor and play him in the correct position, he definitely has some pass rushing upside, but his athletic testing was pretty disappointing for someone that we're viewing as a high ceiling pass rushing 3 tech. Overall, Leonard Taylor is a very difficult evaluation. I could definitely see him being one of the more disruptive defensive tackles in this class, but I could also see him struggling to find a role in the NFL. Speaking of disappointing seasons, my 11th ranked defensive lineman is Dwayne Carter out of Duke. Based on his tape from the previous year, you could see this guy being a top 50 pick. In 2022, he had 52 pressures and 8 sacks, but last year he only had 25 pressures and 2 sacks. He's an above average athlete. You'll see him win with a spin move, an inside club, especially when he lines up over the tackle, and then his bull rush is pretty much all or nothing. He's either getting a devastating win and just flattening the blocker in front of him, or he's getting redirected and moved backwards. There aren't even that many stalemate bull rushes on his tape. If he doesn't win, he's either getting snatch trapped or put on his back. As a run defender, he's got some decent hand quickness. He definitely has the first step explosiveness to outpace reach blocks, but he's really lacking in play strength in the run game. He gets washed out of his gap by single blocks, double teams, you can forget about it, and he misses a ton of tackles. He's had at least a 22% missed tackle rate every season of his career. So he's a 3 technique only, and even there, I don't think he projects as a plus run defender. And as a pass rusher, if you could unlock the flashes that he shows like twice per game, I would be really excited about that. But his 2023 tape was so disappointing, and he just doesn't show it consistently enough for me to have anything higher than a 5th round grade on him. And my 10th ranked defensive lineman and highest graded pure nose tackle is Fabian Levette out of Florida State. This is a player where he just is what he is. He's a high caliber run defending nose tackle, doesn't give you really anything as a pass rusher. He's got 5 career sacks. Over the last 2 seasons, he has 17 total pressures, but he has elite size, 6'4", 314 pounds, 35.5-inch arms. He has violent hand usage in the run game, really good footwork against double teams. He can split combo blocks and make plays in the backfield. He's just a rock solid run defender. Really, the one thing I would change if I could is make him a little bit shorter and a little bit wider. He has somewhat of a high cut build, and there are times that can affect his balance. I noticed it a couple times against Pittsburgh. It's really something that popped up like 4 to 5 times on his tape. For the most part, he was one of the best run defenders in college football. But as a pass rusher, you just can't really expect much. He's not a great athlete. He has advanced hand usage in the run game, but that doesn't really translate to his pass rushing plan. He's strong, but he's too upright and too sluggish of a first step to generate much power. And for an older player, that does limit him to an early 5th round grade. But if you're a team that already has a pass rushing 3 tech and you just need a solid early down nose tackle, I think Fabian Levette is your guy on day 3. We've got a significant tier jump into the early day 3, late day 2 defensive linemen. And if I was ordering this for a specific team, I would have all different kinds of combinations and orders. But this tier is going to start with my 9th ranked defensive lineman, Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon. And Dorlus is someone where you watch his tape and it's like, man, this is a great player. And then it comes time to give him a grade and actually project him to a scheme fit in the NFL, and it's a lot more difficult. He was 6'3", 283 at the combine. He's the classic player where he's not really athletic enough to be a stand-up edge rusher, but he might not be big or strong enough to hold up on the interior. He has pretty good length, really talented hand usage. He's got a dominant club swim, really effective long arm. He's a fluid mover that just slips around blocks and kind of climbs through the layers of the backfield. And if you list him as a defensive tackle, he's got elite athletic traits, but if you're talking about playing him on the edge, he doesn't have that first step explosiveness to really threaten the outside at all. If he lines up across from an NFL offensive tackle, they're not going to be worried about getting beat around the corner. But on the inside, he can get driven out of his gaps, double teams especially, he puts up very little resistance. I think if you can craft a role for him where he's getting a lot of 3rd down pass rushing opportunities on the inside and then playing on the outside on early downs, I think he could have some success, but I worry that he's just too much of a tweener to really have a permanent home in the NFL. My 8th ranked defensive lineman is Braden Fisk out of Florida State. This is a player I'm definitely lower on than consensus. It's funny because if I was doing a biggest sleepers video before the Senior Bowl, Braden Fisk would almost definitely be on that list. Watching Florida State's tape, it's just impossible to ignore Braden Fisk. High energy energy, disruptive player, and you can tell that he's a great athlete, but at the combine, he put on a show with a 95th percentile 40-yard dash, 95th percentile short shuttle. Every single movement skill drill was at least 87th percentile, and from that point, he has shot up media boards. He's now 47th on the consensus board. There's a lot of people that have him as a high second round pick, but I just think he has some real limitations as far as being a 3-down player that would justify that kind of draft capital. Most of what Braden Fisk does at a high level is running unblocked into the backfield. He can knife through double teams. He's a maniac on stunts and twists. He can outpace reach blocks and make stops in the backfield. As a player that you put in on passing downs and tell him to just scream upfield, I think he can wreak havoc on opposing offenses. But when we look at the rest of his game, there are just so many other limitations with Braden Fisk. He's 292 pounds, which is undersized even for a 3 technique. He's got 31-inch arms, which is first percentile for all defensive linemen. And you see those size limitations show up really in every phase. He gets transported in the run game by double teams and by single blocks. It's not uncommon for him to get moved 8 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. Some of his tackles even are happening 8 yards down the field. This just isn't a player that can be on the field on early downs and hold the point, control the gap, unless you're slanting every single play and just designing your run fits so that Braden Fisk can avoid contact at all costs. He's going to be a liability against the run. So the weaknesses in the run game, that's already knocking down his value for me because now he's a designated pass rusher, but even his pass rushing skill set I think is very incomplete. He struggles to win with his hands as a pass rusher. He doesn't really have a refined pass rushing moveset, but even if he did, his lack of length really limits his ability to win with cross-face moves. If he tries to use a cross chop where he's exposing his chest, the blocker can just land his hands inside, and that pretty much neutralizes his entire pass rushing effort. There are times he's able to pressure the quarterback purely by winning with first step quickness, and if you match him up with a slow-footed guard, I think he could get some wins like that in the NFL, but it's going to be a lot more difficult, and if the blocker's able to establish contact, they put his speed rush into the ground pretty frequently. He doesn't have a consistent power rush. He struggles to convert speed to power. The majority of his sacks and hits were unblocked. If you criticize Braden Fisk, there's like a bat signal that goes up where people tell you to watch the Louisville game, and I watched the Louisville game. He had a couple nice TFLs in the run game. I'll give him that. One of them was like the first play of the game, but he had 2 sacks in that game that were completely unblocked. That just doesn't move me a whole lot as far as evaluating a pass rusher. So I think if Braden Fisk lands on a team that already has established pass rushers on their defensive front and he can just be a complementary piece, I do think there's a good chance that he's a productive player. I don't think he can be the #1 guy that teams are keying in on every play, and I don't really see him having much upside as being a 3-down player, so that's going to limit his grade for me. But I can already see him landing on like the Cowboys or the Steelers and having 8 sacks as a rookie, and I look like an idiot. So there is definitely a world where he puts up some good production. I just don't think it'll be as a #1 guy. My 7th ranked defensive tackle is Rook Orororo out of Clemson, another player that's almost a pure projection. On tape, I viewed him as kind of a Brandon Dorlus type. He's tall and lean. It seems like his best fit might actually be head up over the tackle. He weighed in about 10 pounds heavier than Dorlus, and I think he has the frame to add a little bit more mass, and I think his awareness and hand usage in the run game was really impressive, but he just doesn't have the lower half strength, I think, to consistently anchor in the NFL. Most of his losses were just getting driven off the ball. He's really balanced and fluid when he gets into the backfield. He can slide around in tight quarters and finish TFLs pretty consistently. He's really good at stacking a block and reading the play development through traffic. So overall, I think solid run defender with some play strength deficiencies. And then as a pass rusher, it kind of comes back to the common theme with Clemson front 4 defenders. They just don't let him tee off and rush the quarterback one-on-one very often. He's read stepping, playing the run, or he's twisting into a gap. There's relatively few plays where he can just be a face-up rusher. When he did get those opportunities, you saw him win with a swipe rip, a club rip. He has long arms, he's flexible, he's got the second gear to close in on the quarterback. His tape had him with a 4th round grade, but he was one of the best testers at the combine, and I'm kind of just choosing to bet on the athletic traits getting unlocked in a different defensive scheme. My 6th ranked defensive lineman lineman is Mason Smith out of LSU. He's a former 5-star recruit that early in his career was viewed as a potential early first-round pick. He's dealt with injuries that have really slowed down his production and knocked him down to probably a day 2, maybe even early day 3 pick, but I think he should be firmly in the 3rd round conversation. He's a young player with some really exciting athletic traits. He's 6'5", 306 pounds with 35-inch arms, but 8.5-inch hands. His arm length is 96th percentile and his hand size is 0th percentile. And at his size and specifically his height, really his one pass rushing move is the club swim. He just spams that over and over again. With his natural high pad level, that's really the easiest move for him to execute. It's just a natural movement for him to pin the block and wrap his arm over their head, but he doesn't really have a second move or a counter. If that club swim doesn't work, he's not going to impact the play. So he's got to diversify his pass rushing skill set, and even though he is a taller player, he's got to find a way to play with some lower pad level. But the most disappointing part of his tape was the run defense. He's a high effort player. He's chasing down screens and tosses from the backside, but it's just so easy for blockers to get underneath his pads and drive him out of gaps. He doesn't do a good enough job establishing early control. When he does get his hands inside early, he can be a dominant block shedder, but at his height, he's got to be more proactive protecting his frame from blockers. A short, stout center or guard can just get underneath him and move him off the line of scrimmage. He also had really poor awareness of combo blocks on outside zone. He was easily sealed off by overtakes, and he doesn't do a great job of seeing through traffic and reading the play while he's engaging with a block. So there's a lot of development that needs to happen really in both phases, but especially in the run game, and that could keep him off the field early in his career. But he does have elite upside, and that's the kind of defensive tackle prospect that you see go in the mid to late 3rd round. My 5th ranked defensive lineman is Mekhi Wingo out of LSU. He's 6 foot flat, 284 pounds, 32-inch arms, but he has elite first step explosiveness. His 10-yard split was in the 98th percentile. He can straight up just outrun blockers to the quarterback. He's so explosive off the line of scrimmage that allows him to shoot gaps in the run game and put blockers on their heels as a pass rusher. But despite being undersized, I thought he was a lot more sturdy in the run game than you would expect. He obviously doesn't have the ideal size, and he's probably going to struggle against double teams in the NFL, but he makes up for that lack of size with really good stack and shed technique. He only has 32-inch arms, but he's able to create and maintain separation against base blocks fairly consistently. He does a good job using upward strikes to raise the blocker's pad level and accentuate his leverage advantage. He has good vision and play recognition in the run game. He keeps his eyes in the backfield as he works through blocks. I think based on where he is from a technical standpoint, Wingo's a player that could actually punch above his weight class in the run game. As a pass rusher, there is still some development that needs to happen, and there are also some limitations, I think, but his first step gives him an immediate advantage with any type of move. He's able to access the blocker's edge as a pass rusher so quickly and put them in recovery mode right off the snap. He can blast into a blocker's frame and generate serious power with his bull rush. In the Arkansas game especially, they lined him up a few snaps over the tackle, and he just flattened Arkansas's tackles with a speed to power. His bull rush was a lot less effective on the interior, so he might end up being kind of a one-dimensional pass rusher based on where he lines up. As far as hand usage, I saw him win with a cross chop, a club swim, and a club rip. I think overall he still needs to refine his hand placement and timing as a pass rusher, and his arm length is going to limit how effective he can be winning with his hands. But I view Mekhi Wingo as kind of like Braden Fisk with a much better anchor and slightly longer arms. He's still probably best suited as a complementary piece, but I think he could actually find a role on all 3 downs. And even if he's a team's 2nd or even 3rd defensive lineman, I still think he can add a lot of value as a 3rd round pick. Now, deciding between 3 and 4 was definitely the toughest decision in this defensive line class, but I ended up going with Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State as my 4th ranked defensive lineman. In my opinion, he's the most explosive and athletic defensive lineman in this class. If he has a two-way go, it is almost unblockable. His club swim was pretty much undefeated at the college level. He had a 95th percentile 10-yard split, 97th percentile 40-yard dash. His legs are made out of springs. He just crosses the blocker's face instantly. Despite being undersized at 6'3", 290, he actually has pretty long arms, and he just gains so much initial leverage with that first step, clubs the shoulder to give himself an extra boost. He has the explosiveness and the technical technical refinement with that one move to just spam it over and over again. He's one of the least experienced players in this class, and he wasn't that productive as a pass rusher in terms of raw stats. He only had 29 pressures and 2 sacks last year, but he ranks second in college football with an 18.3% pass rush win rate. He doesn't really have a diverse pass rushing plan, but he just uses that club swim over and over again, and no one was able to stop it. The other move that he uses with any sort of frequency is the bull rush, and that wasn't very effective. If he actually just used the club swim every snap, he might have like a 45% pass rush win rate, but he doesn't really have the play strength yet to win with power, and again, he only has one finesse move that he really has committed to memory. But if he can add 1 or 2 more counters, he has elite upside as a pass rushing 3-tech. But for all of his pass rushing upside, the main reason that I don't have a much higher grade on Michael Hall Jr. is that he is so weak against the run. It's one thing if you're a high impact pass rusher that just isn't a plus in the run game, you can absolutely live with that. But with Michael Hall Jr. at this point, it's to the level where you can't really have him on the field on early downs. He gets tossed around by single blocks, absolutely consumed by double teams. He definitely makes some plays in the run game as far as shooting gaps, but when it comes to just holding up at the point of attack, he struggled with that at the college level, and in the NFL, it's going to be a completely different ball game. So you're looking at a player that I think has to add some weight to carve out a 3-down role. I think he can immediately be a disruptive designated pass rusher, but when it comes to draft value, if you're a player that we have to take off the field on early downs, that really limits how high I can grade you. And then my third ranked defensive tackle is Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. He's slightly undersized, just under 6'3", 299 pounds, but he has long arms and he's a very good run defender. There are some times that he'll get overwhelmed by raw power in the run game. JC Latham was able to move him out of his gap several times, and he will get pancaked, I would say anecdotally, once every 2 games. But as far as technique in the run game, he's as good as it gets in this class. He's automatic shooting his hands inside and establishing early control. When he's able to latch onto a blocker, he really maximizes his length and fully separates from the block. He's a really effective lock, peek, shed defensive tackle, and then he has the twitch and explosiveness to shoot gaps and make plays in the backfield. Now, we were hoping that he would have somewhat of a breakout season as a pass rusher. In 2022, he had 20 pressures and 2 sacks, but in his final year at Michigan, he didn't really show the development that people were expecting. He once again had 20 pressures and 2 sacks. He was playing a rotational role. He averaged under 28 snaps per game and only eclipsed 40 snaps one time in the playoff against Alabama. And Michigan's another scheme that really prioritizes run defense with their defensive tackles. He had very few opportunities to just fire off the snap and try to get pressure early. So I actually project Chris Jenkins to be a more effective and productive pass rusher in the NFL than he was in college, because in his limited opportunities, you do see some high-end pass rushing traits. He has a really fluid inside spin move, which is pretty rare for defensive tackles. He doesn't really have many hand moves, but he's got quick and coordinated hand usage in the run game, and he has really long arms, so it's easy to project that to develop. And a lot of his wins as a pass rusher were just twitchy lateral change of directions, shooting into gaps and crossing the blocker's face. So when I compare Chris Jenkins and Michael Hall Jr., I think Hall definitely has more upside as a pass rusher, but I still think Jenkins could develop into one of the 10 best interior rushers in the NFL. And then what they give you as run defenders, it's just night and day. Jenkins might have some issues against power, but Michael Hall Jr., it's just an automatic loss against a down block. All right, we are now into the top 2, and I have both of these players with very similar grades. They are both top 16 players in this class to me with true first round grades, but my second ranked defensive tackle is going to be Johnny Newton out of Illinois. Johnny Newton is fast, twitchy, and explosive. He has 2 seasons of high level pass rushing production. Over the last 2 years, he leads defensive tackles in this class in total pressures. He doesn't have very long arms, but he's a pass rushing technician. He's got a full moveset at his disposal. He's got a cross chop, a swipe, a club swim. He can win with a bull rush. To me, if he had longer arms, he would be a top 10 borderline blue chip type of player. He has counters as a pass rusher. He's quick to transition into his secondary rush. When it comes to the first 70% of the pass rushing rep, I think Johnny Newton has the complete skill set that you look for outside of arm length. He did have some issues with changing directions and bending back to the quarterback. There were a lot of unfinished sacks on tape, and you'd kind of see his legs die out at the top of the rush. rush, but it's hard for me to see him not being a disruptive pass rusher at the next level. And then he's fairly undersized. He actually measured in at the combine at 304 pounds. He was listed at 295 at Illinois, but I thought he was a plus in the run game and definitely punched above his weight class. He has really good stack and shed technique, and despite his length, he's able to create separation from blocks. He flows with stretch plays and outside zone like a linebacker. Like, he's got legitimate chase down pursuit speed. He's able to backdoor reach blocks and then make up that extra distance and close in on the ball carrier. At his size, if he isn't early and precise with his initial steps, he can get covered up by reach blocks. And then again, he misses too many tackles in the backfield. He had 12 missed tackles in 2023. He didn't have too many issues anchoring in the run game. There weren't very many negative plays on tape, but projecting to the NFL, I could see him having some issues holding up against power. But yeah, I think Johnny Newton is a clear top 20 player in this class to me. Having him in the 30s doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless it's the injury that's playing a big factor in that. But my top ranked defensive tackle is Byron Murphy out of Texas. He has similar size concerns to Johnny Newton. He's 6'1.5", 297 pounds with just over 32-inch arms. I do think he's a slightly more explosive and fluid athlete, and he's probably less refined with his hand usage as a pass rusher. He's one of those players just a half step down from Michael Hall Jr., where it's almost automatic gaining leverage with his first step. He can line up face up with a blocker and threaten them in either direction, and they just don't have the slide quickness to mirror him. He had the highest pass rush win rate in college football last year at 19.6%. He has a really effective bull rush. He does a great job translating that first step into initial power. He has good leg drive to sustain that power and push the pocket. He has a club rip to win the edge and rack up a lot of quick wins. And then as a secondary counter move, he has a really effective push-pull for when he's stalemated with a block, he can disengage and work upfield. I really think there are a lot of similarities between Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton. Another one is that Murphy also struggled with converting sacks. He left a lot of sacks on tape. Texas defense was one of the first units I watched, so I watched Byron Murphy's tape really early, back when he was a consensus second or third round pick, and I remember thinking if he had just converted a few more of these missed sack opportunities, he would already be a consensus first rounder. But with Murphy, you do see kind of a lack of bend and change of direction inside the pocket to close in on the quarterback. He's kind of a one-track mover once he breaks into the pocket. There are times if he doesn't win early and the blocker's able to latch onto his jersey where he can get tossed aside as a pass rusher. I think, again, his lack of length could be a bit of a limitation in that phase, and he needs to continue to diversify his pass rushing plan. I think still he's at a good starting point for a true junior. But outside of that, I love how Byron Murphy projects as a pass rushing 3-tech. In the run game, he's better than you would expect for a player of his size. Now, he actually played a lot of his snaps at nose tackle, which he probably won't be doing in the NFL. So he was facing a lot more double teams than he's probably going to face next year. He performed admirably for a 300-pound defensive tackle. He did a good job of using that knee drop technique to kind of sustain that initial push and then bounce back up into the play. But when he just had to plant his feet and set his anchor, he was consistently getting displaced or even flattened by double teams. He ended up on the ground a lot as a run defender. But against single blocks, I thought he had an extremely high success rate. He did a really good job of locking out down blocks. He's so quick to react off the snap and shoot his hands inside. Very difficult player to reach because he's got the speed and explosiveness to flow with stretch runs, but then he also does a great job of stacking reach blocks and keeping his play side hand free. And then again, the athleticism and then also the effort shows up with him chasing down runs from the backside. He plays with a very high motor. So I think in the NFL, he's most likely an average to above average run defender, but he has elite upside as a pass rusher, and if he's able to reach that, then whoever drafts him is fine with that. These are the defensive tackles I haven't watched. I don't plan on getting to any of these players. Might run through a few games of Oregon defense just to knock out 3 players in one sitting, but definitely not a priority. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. These videos are the culmination of hundreds of hours of film study and writing up reports, so a like is very much appreciated. If you want to see my full draft board as an interactive filterable table, I've got that up at a2zsports.com. The link to that is in the description. You can see all of my scouting reports, consensus big board, athletic testing percentiles. All the information that you see in this video is packed into a single draft tool. And make sure to join me for the first 2 days of the draft. I'll be doing a live stream on this channel breaking down every single pick. Excited to interact with y'all and go back and forth in the chat.